This is The Boy with Wings by Berta Ruck, a work in the public domain. Chapter 4. TH Week, END. For the following weekend saw, among many other things that had not been bargained for, those lovers apart again. The very next Saturday after that aviation dinner was that not to be forgotten day in England, when this country, still uncertain, weighed the part that she was to play in the Great War. Late on the Friday night of an eventful week, Paul Dampier, the airman, had received a summons from Colonel Conyers. And Gwenna, who had left the aircraft works on Saturday morning to come up to her Hampstead club, found there her lover's message, "Away till Monday. Wait for me." She waited with Leslie. In that bright afternoon, the two girls had walked, as they had so often walked together, about the summer-burnt heath that was noisy with cricketers on the grass. They had turned down by the ponds where bathers dived from the platforms set above the willows, clean-built English youth splashing and shouting and laughing joyously over their sport. Last time Gwenna had been with her chum, it was she, the girl in love, who had done all the talking while Leslie listened. Now it was Leslie who was restless, strung up, talkative. A new Leslie, her dark eyes anxious and sombre, her usually nonchalant voice strained as she talked. "Taffy, do you realise what it all means? Supposing we don't go in. We may not go in to war with the others. I know lots of people in this country will do their best so that we don't lift a finger. People like the Smiths, my brother-in-law's people, well-to-do, hating anything that might get in the way of their having a good year and grubbing up as much money as usual. Oh, if we don't go in, I shall emigrate. I shall turn American. I shan't want to call myself English any more. Perhaps you don't mind because you're Welsh." Little Gwenna, who was rather pale, but who had a curious stillness over the growing anxiety in her heart, said, "Of course I mind." She did not add her thoughts. He said he hoped the war would come in his time. "I know he would think it perfectly awful if England didn't fight, and even I can feel that it would be horribly mean, just looking on at fighting when it came." Leslie, striding beside her up the hill, went on bitterly, "War! Oh, it can't come. For years we've said so. Haven't we taken good care not to let ourselves get hysterical over the German scare? Haven't we disbanded regiments? Haven't we beaten our swords into cash registers? Haven't we even kept down the navy? Haven't we spread the idea that soldiering was a silly, obsolete kind of game? Aren't we quite clever and enlightened enough to look down upon soldiers as a kind of joke, the brainless army type?" "Don't let's forget that phrase," urged the soldier's daughter. "Why, Taffy, I'll tell you what happened only last May. I went to Gamage's to get a birthday present for Hilary, my sister Maudie's little boy. Of course he's got heaps of everything a child wants, delightful floor games, beautiful hand-wrought artistic toys made in Munich. Still, I thought he might like a change. I told the man in the shop I wanted a toy book of soldiers. Nice simple drawings and jolly, crude, bright colours of all the different regiments, like we used to have at home. And what do you suppose the shopman said? He was very sorry, but they hadn't stopped that class of thing for some time now, so little demand for it, so little demand for anything that reminds us we've got an empire to keep." Gwenna said half absently, "It was only toys, Leslie. Only one more sign of what we're coming to." "Teaching the young idea not to shoot," said Leslie gloomily. "That and a million other trifles are going to settle it, I'm afraid. If England is to come down, that's the sort of thing that will have done it. Oh, Leslie's been in it too, and all her friends, dancing and drifting and dressing up while Rome's been burning." "There'll be no war, Taffy," Gwenna said, quietly and convinced. "Yes, there will." And she quoted the saying of the lady at the aviation dinner, "If England is ever to be saved, it will be by the few." They walked round the Highgate ponds and down the steep hill between the little, ramshackle Victorian-looking shops of Heath Street. It was busy as ever on a Saturday afternoon. They passed the usual troop of Boy Scouts, the usual straggle of cricketers and lovers from or for the Heath, and then a knot of rather boyish-looking girls and girlish-looking boys wearing the art-green school cap of some co-educational institution. "What sort of soldiers do we expect those boys ever to make?" demanded Leslie. Outside the dark, red-tiled entrance to the Hampstead Tube, there was a little crowd of people gathered about the paper, sellers with their pink arresting posters of Rumours OFWAR England's decision. "They'll publish a dozen before anything is decided," said Leslie. She bought a paper, Gwenna another. "No, nothing in them but surmise, suspense theories." They walked on, passing Miss Armitage from the club, who had paused on the curve to talk to one of her friends, a long-haired man in a broad-leafed brown hat. He seemed to be dispensing pamphlets to people in the street. As Miss Armitage smiled and nodded goodbye to him, the two other girls came up. he of the locks slipped a pamphlet into the hand of Leslie Long. She glanced at it, stopped, and looked at it again. It was headed, "Britain, stand aside." Leslie stood for a moment and regarded this mail. She said very gently, "You don't want any war?" The long-haired person in the gutter gave a shrug and a little superior smile. "Oh, well, that's assumed, isn't it?" he said. "We don't want any war. Or any country, I suppose," said Leslie, walking on. She held the pamphlet a little gingerly between her finger and thumb. She had thought of tossing it into the gutter, but no. She kept it as a curiosity. Late that night she sat on Gwenna Williams' bed at the club, suspense eating at her heart. For all the soldier blood in her had taken her back to old times in barracks, or in shabby lodging houses in garrison towns, or on echoing, sunny parade grounds. Times before she had drifted into the gay fringes of the cosmopolitan jungle of bohemian life in London. Before the hospital, the art school, the daily job, with her evenings for the theatre and the Crabtree Club, and the dances she loved. It is the first 10 years of a child's life that are said to count. They counted now. The 26-year-old Leslie, whose childhood had been passed within sound of the bugle call, waited to know if the ideas of honour and country and glory, which she had taken in unconsciously in those far-off times, were now to be tossed down into the gutter as she would have tossed the leaflet of that coward. These things, as Miss Armitage and her friends could have told her, were mere sentimentalities, names, ideas. Yet what has ever proved stronger than an idea? "Oh, Taffy," she sighed impatiently, "if we're told that we're to sit still and nothing will happen." And little Gwenna, lying curled up with a hand in her chum's, murmured again, "That's not what's coming." She was quiet because she was dazed with the sheer intensity of her own more personal anxiety. What will happen about Paul? What will he do? Chapter 5. THEISCAS. On Sunday morning, she and Leslie went to church. In the afternoon they walked again, aimlessly. She felt that she was only living until Monday, until his return to tell her something. In the evening, the two girls sat out on a seat on Parliament Hill, near where the man with the standing telescope used to offer peeks at London for a penny a time. Far, far below lay London under her web of twinkling lights. London, England's heart, with that silver ribbon of the river running through it. Leslie looked away over that prospect as though she had never seen it before. Little Gwenna turned from it to the view on the other side. The grass spaces and the trees towards Hendon. She thought, on a night as clear as this, aeroplanes could easily go up, even late. As the two girls reached the club again, they found a motor drawn up beside the entrance. Steps came out of the darkness behind them. A man's voice said, "Miss Long." Leslie turned. There moved into the light of the street lamp Hugo Swain. His face, somehow, had never looked less like an imitation of Chopin, or more like an ordinary commonplace Englishman's. It was serious, set, yet it was exultant. For he, too, was a soldier's son. He spoke. "I say, I thought I'd bring you the news," he began gravely. "It's all right. England goes in." "Is that official?" Leslie asked sharply. There was a shaky little "war" from Gwenna. Then came other, quick steps on the asphalt path, and the girls saw over Hugo's rather portly shoulder a taller, slighter figure coming up the road behind him. It was hatless, the lamplight shone golden on its blonde head. Gwenna's heart leaped to her lips. "Paul!" she cried, and made a running step towards him. In a moment young Dampier was up with the others, the quartet standing as they had stood on that spring night in this same place after the Smiths' dinner party. There were hasty greetings, murmurs of "not official," "ah, that's all right," "they won't say for a day or so, but—" Then clear and distinct, young Dampier's boyish voice rang out in a curious announcement. "Glad you're here, Hugo. I was coming to you. I want to borrow rather a lot of money of you at once. £40, I think it is. Sorry, must have it. It's for a marriage licence." Hugo, utterly taken aback, stared and murmured, "My dear chap, certain, a mere." "Yes, I shall have to be off, you know." "Of course. And I shall get married before I go," announced Paul Dampier brusquely. He turned as brusquely to the girl. "You and I are going to get married by special licence," he told her, "the day after tomorrow." Chapter 6. HER Guardian's Consent. The Reverend Hugh Lloyd, who was Gwenna Williams' only relative and guardian, and therefore the person from whom consent might be asked if ever the girl wished to be engaged, sat reading the Cambrian news. He sat, over his breakfast eggs and tea, in the kitchen, sitting room of his chapel house. Inside, the grandfather clock ticked slowly, but still pointed, as ever, to 2:30, and the cosy room, with its Welsh dresser and its bookshelves, still held its characteristic smell of singeing hearthrug. Outside, quiet brooded over the valley that fine August morning. The smoke from the village chimneys rose blue and straight against the larches of the hillside. The more distant hills of that landscape were faintly mauve against the cloudless, fainter blue of the late summer sky. All the world seemed so peaceful, and the expression on the Reverend Hugh's face of a Jesuit priest under its thatch of bog-cotton hair was that of a man at peace with all the world. True, there were rumours, in some of the newspapers, of some war going on somewhere in the world outside. But it was a long way from here to that old continent, as they called it. For the matter of that, it was a long way to London, where they settled what they were going to do about Germany. What they were going to do about Welsh disestablishment was a good deal more important to a Welshman. There were some very good things about that in this very article. The Reverend Hugh had written it himself. Presently, in the midst of his reading, his housekeeper, who was a small, middle-aged woman, rather like a black hen, entered the room at a run. "Telegram for you, sir." "Ah, yes, thank you, Margaret," her master said as he took it. He had guessed already what was in it. Some arrangement to do with his next Sabbath day's journey. For he was a very popular preacher, invited to give sermons by exchange in every country town in Wales. "This," he told his housekeeper complacently, as he tore open the envelope, "will be to say am I expected in Carnarvon on the Sat Torda, or—" Here he broke off, staring at the message in his hand. It was a long one. There was a moment's silence while the clock ticked. Then that silence was broken by an exclamation, in Welsh, from a man startled out of all professional decorum. He added, with more restraint, but also in Welsh, "Great King!" Then he exclaimed, "Dear father, and name of goodness!" "What is it, Mr. Lloyd Bach?" demanded his housekeeper excitedly in Welsh, clutching her black crochet wool shawl about her shoulders as she waited by the side of the breakfast. "Is it somebody died?" In her mind's eye she saw already that loved orgy of her kind. A funeral. The Reverend Hugh shook his handsome white head. Again he read through the longest telegraph message that he had ever received. It ran, "Dear Sir, I'm going to marry your niece Gwenna tomorrow, Tuesday morning, at Hampstead Regret. Forced to give you this short notice, but impossible to do, otherwise owing military duties. Trust you will excuse. Apparent casualness. Will write further particulars. Yours sincerely, Paul Dampier, Lieutenant, Royal Flying Corps." "Name of goodness," breathed the Reverend Hugh, brushing back his white locks in consternation, and at short intervals he continued to ejaculate, "What did I tell her? What did I tell her? Indeed, it's a great pity I ever let her go away from home. It was my fault, young men." This one sounds as if he was gone quite mad, whatever. So the Reverend Hugh addressed his answer to Miss Gwenna Williams at her club, and it said, "Coming up to see you 9:30 Euston tonight. Uncle." "I'm sure he'll be simply horrid about it," Gwenna rather tremulously told her betrothed that evening as they walked, the small, curly-haired girl in dark blue and the tall, grey-clad aviator, up and down the platform at Euston Station, waiting for the Welsh train to come in. Little Gwenna was experiencing a feeling not unknown among those shortly to be married, namely, that every prospect was pleasing, save that of having to face one's relatives with the affair. "He was always rather a dreadful old man," she confided anxiously to Paul, as they paced the sooty flags of the platform. "It's just like him to be 16 minutes late already, just when I want to get this over. He never understands anything about people when they're young, and the first thing he's sure to ask is whether you've got any money. Have you, Paul?" "Stacks," said the airman reassuringly. "Old Hugo made it 60, as a wedding present. Decent of him, wasn't it?" They turned by the blackboard with the chalked-up notices of arrivals and departures, and Gwenna ruefully went on with her prophecy of what her uncle would say. "He'll say he never heard of anybody marrying an airman. I don't suppose he's ever heard of an airman at all before now. Ministers and quarry managers and people with some prospects, that's the sort of thing they've always married in Uncle Hugh's family," she said anxiously, "and he'll say we've both behaved awfully badly not to let him know before this. Just as if there was anything to know. And he'll say you turned my silly head when I was much too young to know my own mind. And then he's quite sure to say that you only proposed to me because— well, of course," she broke off a little reproachfully, "you never even did propose to me properly. Too late to start it now, said her lover, laughing, as the knot of porters surged forward to the side of the platform. Here's the train coming in. Now Gwenna was right about the first thing that Uncle Hugh would ask, when, after a searching glance and a handshake to this tall young man that his niece introduced to him at the carriage door, he carried off the pair of them to the nearby hotel where the minister always put up on his few and short visits to London. "Well, young gentleman," he began, in his crisp yet deliberate Welsh accent. He settled himself on the red plush sofa and gazed steadily at Paul Dampier on one of the red plush armchairs. "Well, and have you got the money requisite to keep a wife?" "No, I'm afraid I haven't, sir, really," returned the young man, looking frankly back at him. "Of course I'd my screw. £3.10 a week I was getting as a pilot. But that was only just enough for myself, with what I had to do for the machine. Of course I'm going to have her, the flying machine, taken up now, so—" "It's very little faith I have in such things as flying machines." "Flying? Yes, in the face of Providence, I call it," said the Reverend Hugh discouragingly, but with the dawn of some amusement in his searching eyes. "What I say about the whole idea of aviation is kite-high lunacy." "Uncle," scolded Gwenna, blushing for him. But the young airman took the rebuke soberly enough. "And out of that income," went on Uncle Hugh, still looking hard at this modern suitor in that incongruous red plush setting with its 19th century clocks and ornaments, "out of that income you will not have saved very much." "Afraid not, sir," agreed young Dampier, who, last night, had been down to his last 8p. halfpenny and a book of stamps. "Not much to put by, you know, not even," took up the Reverend Hugh shrewdly, "enough to pay for a special marriage licence. Oh, yes, I had that. That is, I've raised that good old Hugo," he thought. "And a bit over," he added, "to take us for some sort of a little trip, to the sea, perhaps. Before I go on service." "Military service, do you mean?" said the Reverend Hugh. "I never have held with soldiery. I do not think that I have ever come into actual contact with any." "Yes, I probably am going on service, Mr. Lloyd," answered the young man quickly, and with a glance at the girl that seemed to indicate that this subject was only to be lightly dealt with at present. "When? I am not sure. Then I shall get my pay as a flight lieutenant, you see. Shan't want any money much then." So she, with a little nod towards the small, defensively set face of Gwenna, sitting very straight in the other red plush armchair, "she will get that sent home to her." "I shan't want all your pay, indeed," interrupted the girl hastily. It seemed to her too revoltingly horrible, this talk about money combined with this sense that a woman married must be an expense, a burden, a woman who longs to mean only freedom and gifts and treasure to her lover. Oh, a woman ought never, never to feel she has to be kept, thought Gwenna, rosy again with embarrassment. "If men don't think we mind, very well, then let all the money in the world be taken away from men and given to us. Let them be kept. And if they don't mind it, well, then it will be a happier world all round." And as she was thinking this, she announced eagerly, If you do go away, I shall stay on with the aeroplane lady as I told you, Paul." "Yes, I'd much rather I should have something to do, and I'd get nearly £1 a week in my keep. Besides, I've got my own money." "Which money, dear?" asked Paul Dampier. The quick eyes of the Reverend Hugh had not left the young man's face. They were fixed still more scrutinizingly upon it as the old man interposed. "Do you mean to tell me, Mr. Dampier, that you were not aware that my niece had got a little bit of her own?" "There! I knew Uncle would say that," burst out the young girl, angry and blushing and ashamed. "I knew he'd say you were only marrying me because of that." "He won't believe that it wouldn't make any difference to you that I've got £75 a year." £75 a year, have you?" said the young man, surprised. "Really?" And it was Gwenna's turn to be surprised as his frank face cleared and his voice took a very relieved note. "I say, how topping!" "Make no difference to me." "But it does, rather," he declared. "Don't you see that I shall know you won't have to work, and that I shall be ever so much more comfortable about you? Why did you never tell me?" "I forgot," said Gwenna truly, and the Reverend Hugh suddenly laughed aloud. At the same time, he hoped he had concealed his relief, which was great. His younger sister's girl was not going to be snapped up by a fortune hunter after all. That had always been his anxiety. £75 a year, certain, remained a considerable fortune to this Victorian. In his valley quite a large house, with a nice bit of garden, too, running steeply up a mountainside, was to be had for a rent of £16. He would have thought of that himself. But the leggy, fair-haired boy who was now smiling across the oval hotel table at his Gwenna had meant only what he had said. The older man realised that. So, waiving for the present the question of means, the Reverend Hugh went on, in rather a modified tone, to ask other questions. Asking questions of the newly accepted suitor seems to be all that remains for the parent or guardian of our times. It is the sole survival of that potent authority which once disposed, or said it disposed, of the young lady's hand. Clearing his throat with the same little sound that so often heralded the words of some text from his pulpit, the Reverend Hugh began by inquiring where Gwenna, after her short honeymoon, was supposed to be going to live. Nowhere new, it appeared. She had her berth at the aircraft factory, her room at Mrs. Crewe's cottage for when young Dampier was away. Yes, from his tone when he spoke of it, evidently that parting was to be kept in the background and evaded as much as possible for the present. And if he were in London, he had his rooms in Camden Town. Do for them both, perhaps. His bachelor digs. Not bad ones. Well, but no house. Well, but no house? Dear me. That was a gypsyish sort of plan, wasn't it? That was a new idea of setting up housekeeping to Uncle Hugh. He, himself, was an old bachelor. But he could see that this was all very different from the ideas of all the young couples in his time. When Gwenna's father now was courting Gwenna's mother, well, he, Hugh Lloyd, had never heard such a lot of talk about mahogany and Tebble linen. And who was to have the 3 feather beds from the old quarry house, Gwenna's mother or Gwenna's mother's sister? All this the Reverend Hugh declaimed in his most distinct chapel voice, but still with his searching eyes upon the face of the husband-to-be. The idea of most young girls, in getting married, he thought, was to get a nice home of their own as soon as possible. A comfortable house. I hate comfortable houses. So stuffy. Just like a tea cosy. They'd smother me, from Gwenna. But the house, her Uncle Hugh had always understood, was the woman's fetish. Spring cleaning now, the yearly rites. And that furniture. The Lares, he went on in an ever-strengthening Welsh accent. The pen-nates. Oh, those, scoffed the girl in love. Those. So Gwenna didn't seem to think she would miss these things. She was willing to marry without them, yes? Strange. Well. And what about this marriage, in haste? Where was it to take place? In that church in Hampstead. A church. Well, he, as an orthodox dissenting minister, ought not perhaps to enter such a place of worship. But after all, this was not at home. This was only up here, in England. Perhaps it wouldn't matter, just this once. And who was the clergyman who was going to officiate at the ceremony? And what sort of a preacher now was he? This was not known. And Mr. Dampier's own relations, would they all be at the church? Only one cousin, he was told. That was the only relation Paul Dampier had left. Same as myself, said the Reverend Hugh, a little quietly. A big family we were. 6 boys, 2 girls, like people used to have, all gone. Nothing left but... Here, for the first time taking his eyes from young Dampier, he turned upon his niece with an abrupt question. With a quick nod towards her husband-to-be, he demanded, and where did you find him? Little Gwenna, still on the defensive, but thawing gradually, since, after all, Uncle Hugh had spoken in friendly tones to the beloved, Gwenna asked, When, Uncle? The time that counts, my girl, said the Reverend Hugh, the first time. Oh. I think it was. It was at a party I went to with my friend Miss Long that I've told you about, explained Gwenna, a little nervously. And he was there. It's quite a long time ago now. Dear me, said the Reverend Hugh. Dukes. There is a lot of things seem to go on, still under the name of party. And there was a sudden and quite young twinkle in the eyes under the white thatch. Paul Dampier, not seeing it, began hastily, I hope you understand, sir, that we were only keeping all this to ourselves because, well, he cleared his throat and made another start. If I'd had the privilege of seeing Gwenna at your place. Yet another start. We had no idea, of course, said Paul Dampier, until fairly recently. Dear me, said the Reverend Hugh again. Then, turning to the young man whom Gwenna had said he would accuse of turning the head of one too young to know her own mind, he remarked with some feeling, I dare say she had made up her mind, that first time, not to give you a bit of peace until you'd sent off that telegram to me. As he was taking the bride. To be back to her club, young Dampier said, smiling. Why, darling? He's not a bad old chap at all. You said he wouldn't understand anything. Well, he doesn't, persisted the mutinous Gwenna. But she laughed a little, relentingly. 20 minutes later, her lover took his leave with a whispered, "Good night. Do you know that I shan't ever have to say it again at this blessed door after this? And another, for luck. Good night. A Miss Williams." She ran upstairs, humming a tune. She was so happy that she could feel kind even to old and unsympathetic and cynical people tonight. Tomorrow she was to be Paul Dampier's wife. It was hardly believable, still it was true. War, now threatening to tear him from her, had at least brought him to her, first, sooner than she had ever hoped. Even if he were forced to leave her quite soon, say in a month's time, she would have had him all to herself first, without any of these small, fretting goodbyes that came so punctually following every meeting. She would have been all his very own, she thought. And here it may be said that upon this subject Gwenna Williams' thoughts were curiously, almost incredibly vague. That dormant bud of passion knew so little of its own hidden root. Marriage. To this young girl it was a journey into a country of which she had never formed any clear idea. Her own dreams had been the rosy mists that obscured alike the heights and depths of that scarcely guessed at land. All she saw clearly was her fellow traveller, the dear boy, comrade, and sweetheart who would not now leave her side. What did it matter where he took her, so that it was with him always? Only one more night now, in the long, narrow club bedroom where she had dreamed that queer flying dream, and so many others, so many longing daydreams about him. Tomorrow was her wedding day. Chapter 7. Haste TOTH wedding. The Tuesday morning that brought Gwenna's wedding day as the morning of the official declaration of war. It was in all the papers over which the girls at the Hampstead Club pored before they went off to their various avocations, staring, half realizing only. Can it be true? War, nowadays? Good gracious! Do you suppose it means we shall really have to send an army of ours, an English army, over to France? What do you think, Miss Armitage? Miss Armitage, the suffragette, then became voluble on the subject of how very different all would have been if women had had the casting vote in the matter. Intelligent women. Women with some insight into the wider interests of their sex. Not mere, here, by way of illustration, this feminist shot a vicious glance at Miss Long. Now, Leslie, dressed in a lilac river frock and wearing her black picture hat, was going round the breakfast table, under the very eye of the disapproving lady principal with the gold curb brooch, on an errand of her own. She was collecting from it the daintiest bits of dry toast, the nicest-looking pats of butter, a white rose from the nosegay in the centre bowl, and all that was left of the marmalade. For, to Leslie Long the question whether war was to be or not to be seemed now to have been settled an age ago. The burden of that anxiety was lifted. The other anxieties ahead could be put aside for the present, and she turned, with a tranquil face, to the immediate matter in hand. She was going to take a little tray up to Gwenna, whom she had advised to have her breakfast in bed, and not to dress until she should make herself all ready for her wedding at that church at the foot of the hill. "Good morning, Madam Bride," said Leslie, smiling, as she came, tray in hand, into the little room where Gwenna was still drowsily curled up against her pillow. "Here's a little bit of sugar for the bird." She sat down on the side of the bed, cutting the dry buttered toast into narrow strips for her chum, taking the top off her egg for her. "But I won't help to salt, help to sorrow for you," she went on talking, just a trifle more brightly than naturally. "Curious thing about a wedding, Taff, I mean one of the curious things about a wedding, is the wide desire it gives you to quote every aged, half-paid proverb and tag that you've ever heard. Marriage is a, not lottery, Leslie, not that one," begged the bride-to-be, sitting up and laughing with her mouth full of toast. "We had it 4 times from Uncle Hugh before we left him last night. Few prizes, many blanks," she quoted joyously. All Monday she had been tremulously nervous. The reaction had come at the right moment. "Happy is the bride that the sun shines on, then," amended Leslie. "You'll be glad to hear it's shining like Billy, this morning." "I saw it," said Gwenna, nodding her curls towards the open casement. "And I shall be getting married in white. Sure to be right, too." The white lingerie frock she was to put on was not new, but it was the prettiest that she had. It lay, folded, crisp as a butterfly's wing, and fresh from the wash, on the top of her chest, of drawers, with the white princess slip. That was new, bought by her in a hurry the day before. And the white silk stockings and the little white Swede shoes. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, Leslie capped her quotation. Where's the something blue, Taffy? Ribbons in my camisole, and I shall borrow your real lace handkerchief, may I? Said the bride-elect. Rather, all that I have, even unto the half of the best man's attention, said Leslie, smiling gaily into the cherub face opposite. But, even as she smiled, she felt the pang which is supposed to be known only to the man who sees his chosen pal prepare to be married and done for. For this morning, that turned an adoring sweetheart into a wife was taking something of her own, of the bridesmaid's youth away. Gwenna Williams married. That meant one more girl chum who would never, never be quite the same again to a once treasured companion. That bubbling fountain of innocent confidences would now run low as far as Leslie was concerned. No longer would the elder, quickly sympathizing, rebellious-tongued girl be the first to hear what happened to her little ingenuous friend. The girlish gossip would have a masculine censor to pass. Leslie could foretell the little scene when it first happened. She could hear Gwenna's eager, "Oh, Paul," Leslie would so laugh at, whatever the little incident might be. I must tell her that. Leslie, the bachelor girl, could imagine the tilt of the young husband's blonde head and his doubtful, "Don't see why it should be supposed to interest her." She could imagine the little wife's agreeing, "Oh, perhaps not." And again the young husband's, "Don't you think Miss Long gets a little bit much sometimes?" "Oh, she's all right, but, I shouldn't like you to go on quite like that." It would be only after years of marriage that the once close chum would turn for sympathy to Leslie Long, and then it would not be the same. The last of Leslie's forebodings seemed the most inevitable. She heard Gwenna's soft Welsh voice, once so full of unexpectedness, now grown almost unrecognisably sedate. She heard it utter that finally settled down sounding phrase, say, "How do you do nicely to Auntie Leslie now?" Ah! That seemed to bring a shadow of autumn already into the summer sunshine of that bridal room with its white prepared attire, its bonny, bright-eyed occupant. It seemed to show what must some day come. Taffy middle-aged. Also what probably would come. Taffy matter. Of fact, Taffy with all the dreams out of her eyes. Taffy whose only preoccupations were, really that stair carpet's getting to look awful. I wonder if I could manage to get a new one and put it on the upper flight. Or, I never saw anything like the way my children wear through their boots. It was only the other day I got that quite expensive pair of Peter Pans for little Hughie. And now look at them. Look. Yes, this sort of change was wrought by time and marriage and domesticity in girl after golden girl. Leslie had seen it. She would probably see Taffy, the fanciful celt, grown stodgy, Taffy, even Taffy, the compactly supple, with all her fruit-like contours grown stout, horrible thought. Then Miss Long gave a protesting shrug of her slim shoulders. This wouldn't do. Come, come. Not on the wedding morning itself should one give way to thoughts of coming middle age. The rose, that must, some day, be overblown, was only just a pouting bud as yet. There were days and fragrant days of beauty still before her. So Leslie picked up her chum's rough towels, her loofah and her verbena scented soap. "I'll turn on the bath for you, Taffy, shall I? Hot or cold?" "Cold, please," said the Welsh girl, springing out of bed and pattering over the oilcloth to fetch her kimono. "Perhaps tomorrow I shall be able to have a real swim." Oh, won't that be gorgeous? For the couple had decided upon Brighton for the honeymoon. It was near enough to London in case young Dampier received a summons, yet near also to country tramps and sea bathing. "I haven't had a swim this year, except in the baths, and you can't count that." "Oh, fancy the sea again, Leslie." Leslie could guess what was at the back of that little exultant skip of the younger girls through the bathroom door. It was sheer innocent delight over the prospect of being able to display to her lover at last something that she did really well. For they had never been by the sea together, he and she. And she was a pretty swimmer. Why... "Now I'll be your maid for the last time, and fasten you up," said Leslie, when she returned from the bathroom. "I suppose you know there isn't a single eye left at the neck of this dress. Always the way with that laundry. It's nothing to it that untidiness puts a man off worse than anything else, this from me. Never mind, I'll hook it into the lace, that's all right. A bonny bride is soon busket. Almost a pity the girls will all have gone, though I know you'd hate to have them staring. Do you know, you are a little pocket Venus. No, I'm not piling it on. You're lovely, Taffy. I hope the Dampier boy tells you so very often and much." "He's vastly lucky." "It's me that's lucky," said the girl in all white devoutly. "Now where's my hat?" "Do you think you're going to be allowed to get married in a hat?" My best white one with the wings, I meant. Pooh, I've arranged for you to have these, said Leslie, and brought out a cardboard box that she had been to fetch while Gwenna was having her bath. From it, she drew a slender chaplet of dark leaves with round white buds with waxen flowers. Orange blossoms, real orange blossoms, cried Gwenna, delightedly sniffing up the sensuous perfume of them. Oh, but where did you get them? Covent Garden. I went down there this morning at 5 with one of the housemaids whose young man is at a florist's, explained Leslie, standing above her to set the pretty wreath upon the pretty head. Now you look like a print of Cupid's coronation, or something like that. Through his curls as the crown on them slips, I'll twist this a tiny bit tighter, and here's the veil. Gwenna stared. A veil too, Leslie. Rather, only chance you get of appearing in this thoroughly becoming kit that carries us all back to the worst days of woman's enslavement. May as well take that chance, remarked Miss Long cheerfully, as she shook out soft, transparent folds of finest white net that she herself had embroidered, working late into the night with a border of leaves in white silk. This is from me. Oh, Les, lie! You got it as a surprise for me, said the little bride, much touched. You worked all these beautiful little laurel leaves. Not laurel, child, meant for myrtle. Pity your geography is so weak, rattled on Leslie, as she heard, outside the club, the stopping of the taxi which had brought the Reverend Hugh Lloyd to call for his detachment of the bridal party. Refreshingly unconventional sort of wedding you're having in some ways, aren't you? The presents were few and inexpensive, such a change from the usual report. The bride was attended by one bridesmaid, her friend Miss Long, clad in mauve linen, mystic, wonderful, taking into consideration that it had done her cousin for Henley last year. The ceremony proceeded without a hitch, except for the usual attempt on the part of the officiating clergyman to marry the bride to the best man. Which must not be, Taffy. You must remember that I've got designs on Mr. Hugo Swain myself. Don't, Leslie, protested the bride. You know I do so hate to think of you getting engaged in that sort of horrible way, instead of just because you can't help it. If only there was somebody you could be really in love with. I shall be really rather in love with Uncle Hugh, I know, prophesied the bridesmaid. What a pity he isn't 30 years younger. Come along, he's waiting. I'm going to kiss him anyhow. Got your gloves? Right. Got my handkerchief. You won't want to shed any tears into it, but there was an added brightness in the green-brown eyes of the little bride as she glanced round the girlish room where Leslie would pack up and put everything to rights for her after she had gone. Impulsively she put her arms round that good chum. You've been so frightfully sweet to me, Leslie, always. Thanks so awfully. Don't kiss me through a veil, my child, protested Leslie, drawing back. Do you want to bring me ill luck? Oh, Leslie, I should want to bring you all the good luck in the world, cried the younger girl earnestly over her shoulder as they went out. If I were given 3 wishes now for a wedding present, one of them would be that you would some day be as happy as me. My dear lamb, said Leslie lightly, running downstairs after her, how do you know I'm not quite as happy in another, in my own way? Gwenna shook the curly head under the orange blossom wreath and the misty veil. It seemed to her that there was only the one way in which a woman could be happy. And the other 2 wishes, suggested Leslie at the sitting-room door. What are they? Mustn't tell, smiled the little bride of superstition with her finger at her lips. If I told, they might not come true. Very earnestly she hoped that those 2 wishes might come true. She thought of them again presently as she stood, there in church, a small, white, mist-clad figure, backed by the coloured window and the crimson altar. She had the kindly glances upon her of her uncle, of her tall girl chum, and of Hugo Swain, who wore a perfect morning coat with a white flower and grey trousers, admirably pressed by his man Johnson. Hugo, but for his Chopin stock, would have looked the very model of a prosperous and conventional bridegroom. He did, in fact, look far more like the popular conception of a bridegroom than did young Paul Dampier in his well-cut but ancient grey tweed suit. The only togs I've got in the wide world, he'd confided to Gwenna, except working clothes and evening things. She stood with her hand in his large, boyish one, repeating in her soft, un-English accent the vows that once seemed to her such a vast and solemn and relentless undertaking. To love, honour and obey. As long as we both shall live, it seemed now so little to have to promise. It seemed only a fraction of all that her heart gave gladly to the Lord of it. Till death us do part, she repeated quietly. And it was then she thought of the 2 wishes. One was that Paul should be always as much in love with her as he was at that moment. She was too young fully to realize the greater wisdom of her own second wish. It was that she herself should always remain as much in love with Paul. If only God would be very, very kind to them, she thought, and allow just this to be. "And you sign your name here," said the clergyman in the vestry to the newly made husband, who put down in his small, neat handwriting, "Paul Dampier, Lieutenant Royal Flying Corps," on the grey-blue sheet, which, duly witnessed and blotted, he was going to tuck away into the breast pocket of his tweed jacket. "No. Those marriage lines are not yours," the parson stopped him with a smile. "Those are the property of your wife." Gwenna, dazed, realized that this referred to herself. She took the folded marriage certificate and slipped it into the white satin ribbon girding her pretty frock. She looked very childish for a wife. But for that bright wedding ring on her finger, half a size too large for it, she might have passed for one of the veiled and white-clad first communicants of an Easter Sunday in Paris. Then she turned up the little face, from which the veil had been thrown back, to be kissed by the others who had followed them into the vestry. Vaguely she heard Leslie's voice, arranging in murmurs with Hugo Swain. "No. Perhaps I'll come on afterwards, after I've helped her to change. No, you take Mr. Lloyd and feed him somewhere." "No, I'm sure those two won't want to come on to any lunch." "Lunch, my dear man? Send them in your car to Victoria, and Johnson can bring it back. They'll be getting away at once." "At once?" Gwenna looked up into her young husband's blue eyes. He caught her hand. "Got you now," he said softly. "Can't run away this time." By rights, she should have walked down the church on his arm. But he did not loose her hand. So it was hand. In hand like children that they hurried out again, ahead of the others, into the sunshine of the porch. The merry breeze took the bride's veil and spread it, a curtain of mist, across the pair of them. Gwenna Dampier caught it aside, laughing gleefully as they stepped out of the porch. The gravity of the service had sparkled into gaiety in their eyes. He crushed her fingers in his. Her heart sang. They would be off. It was almost too lovely to be true, but yes, it was too lovely to be true. A shadow fell across the path, across the bride's white shoe. Johnson, Hugo's man, who had been waiting with the car, stepped quickly up to the bridegroom. "Excuse me, sir, but this message came just as you'd gone into church. I waited. The woman brought it on from your room, sir." Paul Dampier took the wire and read it. The white-frocked girl he had just married stood at the church entrance watching him, while the breeze lifted her veil and stirred her curls and tossed a couple of creamy petals from her wreath onto the breast of his coat. She herself stood motionless, stony. She knew that this was no wire of congratulation such as any bridal couple may expect to receive as they come out of church from their wedding. She knew, even before she heard his deep voice saying, blankly and hurriedly, "I say, it's from the War Office. I shall have to go. I've got to leave you, now. I'm ordered to join at once." Chapter 8. THEGIRLHELAFT behind HIMM. Gwenna Dampier was always to be truly thankful that at that thunderbolt moment of parting at the church door from the lover who had only been her husband for the last quarter of an hour, she had been too dazed to show any emotion. As at the aviation dinner, she had been numbed by excess of joy. So, now, the shock had left her stony. She knew that she had turned quite a calm little face to the concerned and startled faces of the others as they hurried up to ask what was happening, that Paul should be getting into that car alone. It was as quiet and calm to receive Paul's last kiss as he held her strained for a moment, almost painfully close to him, muttering, "Take care of yourself, little thing." At the moment it struck her as rather funny, that she was to take care of herself. She, who was just to stay quietly at home, doing nothing. And this was what he told her, he who was going off on service where he himself didn't know. Off to serve as an army aviator, a flyer who swooped above enemy country, to shoot and to be shot at every instant in peril of his life. She even smiled a little as the motor rattled down the hill with him, leaving her to Leslie and to Uncle Hugh and to Mr. Hugo Swain. She found herself thinking, sedately, that it was a good thing Paul had got most of his field service equipment yesterday, shopping while she had shopped, while she had bought the white shoes and the silk stockings, the princess slip, and the handful of other dainty girlish things that had been all the trousseau she could collect in such a hurry. Yes, Paul was all ready, she told her friends. She wouldn't see him again before he left London, she expected. She did not see him again. That night at the club, when she was still dazedly quiet, it was Leslie Long who had to swallow lumps in her own throat, and to blink back, starting tears from her eyes. That night there arrived the first note of his that had ever been addressed to Mrs. Paul Dampier. It was scrawled and hurried and in pencil. It began, "My darling wife." It told her to address to the War Office until she heard from him, and that she would hear from him whenever he could manage it. It ended up, "I was so jolly proud of you because you took it like that, you can't think. I always thought you were a sweet little thing. I knew you'd be a plucky little thing too. Bless you, it's going to be all right. Your affectionate husband, P.D." It was Leslie who cried herself to sleep that night, not Gwenna Dampier. Only gradually the girl came out of the stupor that had helped her, to the realization of what had really happened. He'd gone, she'd been left, without him. But as one source of help disappeared, another came to hand. It was that queer mixture of feelings that the more enlightened young women at the club would have called the conventional point of view. Miss Armitage at the club tea table said to her friends, "Now, I don't consider them at all splendid, as you call it, these girls who go about quite smiling and happily after their husbands have embarked for the war. Saying goodbye without shedding a tear, indeed, and all that kind of thing. Shows they can't care much. Heartless, unsensitive. Callous, I call them." The art student with the trilby hair, who was never quite certain whether she agreed with all Miss Armitage's views or whether she didn't, remarked that really anybody who'd seen Miss William's face when that young man called for her couldn't help thinking that she cared, most awfully. If she didn't make a fuss, it must be because she was rather brave. "Brave? I don't call it that," declared Miss Armitage. "It's just the thing to do among those people. They've made a regular idol of this stupid, deadening convention of theirs. They all want to be alike. Plucky. Not showing anything. Pah! I call it crushing out their own individuality for the sake of an ideal that isn't anything very much, if you ask me. They all catch it from each other, these wretched army men's wives. It's no more credit to them than it is to some kinds of dogs not to howl when you hold them up by their tails." The Trilby art student put in shyly, "Doesn't that show that they're well-bred?" Miss Armitage, the socialist, fixing her through her glasses, demanded, "When you say well-bred, you mean the dogs are, or the women that don't cry?" "Well, both, perhaps," ventured the art student, blushing as she helped herself to jam. Miss Armitage, with her little superior smile, gave out, "There's no such thing as well-bred. What you mean by it? What you mean's just pure snobbery. The real meaning of well-bred is somebody who is specially gifted in mind and body. Well, all you can say of the minds of army people is that they haven't got any. And I don't know that I'm impressed by their bodies." Here, a student of music from the other side of the table said she saw what Miss Armitage meant, exactly. Only, as for army people, Gwenna Williams couldn't have been called that. Her people were just sort of Welsh dissenters, awfully against soldiers and that kind of thing. Doesn't matter. She's the sort of girl who's, just like a chameleon, takes all her colour from the man she's supposed to be in love with, said Miss Armitage loftily. She'll know that she'll never keep him unless she's just like the class of women he thinks most of. As it is, I don't see what that empty-headed girl's got to keep a man with, so, as I say, she'll suppress her own identity and grow the kind he happens to like. The art student murmured that she supposed it didn't really matter, a girl doing that, provided that the new identity, which was grown to please the man, were a better one than the old. Miss Armitage, the feminist, sniffed, silent with contempt for this idea. Then she turned again to the student of music to conclude the summing up of the new bride's character. "She'll be positively stimulated and buoyed up all the time by the thought that he considered it plucky of her to go on as if she was quite pleased that he was fighting," declared the lecturer. "You see, by and by she'll believe she is pleased. She'll catch the whole detestable jingo spirit, I know. Same attitude of mind as the Zulu who runs amok at the sound of a drum. Hysterical. That's what I call what's at the root of it all." But whatever Miss Armitage, the Cockney suffragette, chose to call it, it was there, that spirit. In those few weeks after the declaration of war it spread and throve over all England. It made life still worth living, and well worth living, for thousands of anxious sweethearts, and of mothers giving only sons for their country, and of wives who missed closest comrades, and of young widows who had but lately been made brides. It inspired, through the girl he left behind him, the man who went to war, and thus its influence became part of that subtle but crucial thing which is known as the moral of an army, and of an empire, and of a civilization. It was, as Leslie Long, the lover of quotations, often quoted to herself in those days, the voice to kingly boys to lift them through the fight, and comfortress of unsuccess to give the dead good night. A rule to trick the arithmetic, 2 base of leaguing odds, the spur of trust, the curb of lust, the handmaid of the gods. Little Gwenna, the wife who had been left at the church door, took all the help that spirit gave her. 2 days after her wedding, her Uncle Hugh went back to the slate-roofed village that was wedged between those steep, larch-grown Welsh hills. But, though his niece found that this dreadful old man could be all that was gentle and kind for her, she refused to go home, as he begged her, with him. She said she must live somewhere where she could see a little bit of what was going on. She must have some work, real work, to fill her time. She thanked him. She would let him know directly. She felt she could come down to Wales. But just now, please, she wanted nothing but to get back to Mrs. Crewe, her aeroplane lady at the works. She'd go back, just as if nothing had happened. She returned to find changes at that aircraft factory. Chapter 9. THI, Side OF, THE Front. The first of these changes at the aircraft works was the sight of the khaki-clad sentry at the entrance. He was pacing up and down the bit of dusty road outside the shops, and he stopped Gwenna peremptorily, not knowing that she was one of the staff. She told him and went on. She found the big central shop in a ferment of activity. Mr. Ryan, striding out on some hurried errand, nearly knocked her over. He called an "Awfully sorry, Miss Gwenna, Mrs. Dampier, I mean," over his shoulder. She saw that his day of dalliance was past, even had she been still Miss Gwenna. He had less time for girl nowadays. The frames of no fewer than 4 aeroplanes were set up on the stocks, and out of the body of the most nearly completed one there climbed the slight figure of the aeroplane lady. Her blue and youthful eyes lighted up at the sight of the girl standing in the clear, diffused light of the many windows and backed by the spinning shafting. "Ah, you've arrived, Mrs. Dampier," she said briskly, using the new name without a pause or a smile, for which Gwenna blessed her. "Thank heaven, I shall have a reliable clerk again. No end of correspondence now, my dear. A sheaf of it waiting in the office. Come on and see to it now, will you? And for goodness sake remind me that I am theirs obediently, instead of merely truly, to the Admiralty. I always forget. If I were left to myself, my letters would sound just like the aviators who wrote to the Powers. THTBE, Commander so-and-so, and so presents his compliments and begs respectfully to submit that don't you think it would be a jolly good thing if we started a repairing shop? Somewhere or other. Well, here we are, you see, stacks of it, she went on as they reached that office where an airman's sweetheart had first realized the idea that an aeroplane might mean a ship of war, war in the clouds. "We shall have as much work as we can get through now," said the aeroplane lady. "Look at this order from the War Office, and this, for to all intents and purposes the War Office and the Admiralty had taken over Mrs. Crewe's aircraft factory." And the place rang and echoed long after the hours of the ordinary working man's working day, with the clinking and whirring and hammering of those labours that went to bring forth these great wings of war. Some of the French mechanics whom Gwenna had known well by sight had disappeared. They had been served with their mobilization papers and were now off to serve under the tricolour. 1 or 2 of the English fitters, who were reservists, had rejoined. 1 had enlisted. But now, the aeroplane lady explained, the enlisting of any more of her men had been discouraged. They were too useful where they were. They, with many other sturdy Britons who fretted because they were not to take up other, riskier work on the other side of the Channel, were kept busy enough preparing the arms which those other, envied men were to use. It was for the encouragement of them and their fellow workers in armament and ammunition factories that a bundle of blue-lettered posters came down presently to the works. Gwenna, once more arrayed in the grey-blue, dope-stiffened pinafore, had the job of pinning up here and there in the shops and sheds these notices. They announced to the man at the bench that he was as needful to his country as the man in the trench. They gave out YOUCANITTHE enemy, ASHRWITH hammer, AND rivet, ASYOUCAWIT rifle AND bullet, HITIM. Hurry UPWITHTH ships ANDGUNS. And she too, little Gwenna Dampier clerk and odd job girl, felt herself respond to the appeal. As she typed letters and orders, as she heated dope, as she varnished for the men's handling those huge blue prints with the white, spiders, web-like working drawings, or as she tested square inches of the fine wing linen, she felt that she too was helping in her way to hurry up with those needed ships and guns. Was she not lucky in her job? For always she was buoyed up by the notion that whatever she touched might be of service, not only to the country which the beloved was serving, but to the beloved himself. Who knew? He himself might have to fly in any one of these very machines. Every least part, every atom of metal about them bore the visible, indestructible stamp of the English War Office. And Gwenna herself bore that unseen but indelible stamp of her love to her absent lad in every inch of her pliant girl's body, in every thought of her malleable girl's mind. So the late summer weeks passed as she worked, glad in the thought that any or all of it might be for him. She felt sorry for those women who, when their man is away, have nothing but purely feminine work with which to fill the empty days. Sewing, household cares, knitting, she herself knitted, snatching minutes from the 12 o'clock dinner hour in the cottage with Mrs. Crewe to add rows to the khaki woolen cap comforter that she had started for Paul. It was just a detail in her own busy life. But it struck her that for countless left-behind women, this detail remained all that they had to do, to knit all day, thinking, wondering, fretting over the absent. "That must be so awful. I don't think I should want to live," she told the aeroplane lady one dinner. If there wasn't something else really wanted by the men themselves that I could have to do with." "Every soldier's wife," said Gwenna, drawing herself up above the table with a pretty and very proud little gesture which made Mrs. Crewe smile a little. "I think every soldier's wife ought to have the chance of a job in some factory of this sort, or in a shop for soldiers' comforts, perhaps. Like that woman has in Bond Street where I bought those extra nice khaki handkerchiefs for Paul. She's always thinking out some sort of new dodge for the front, a new sleeping rug or trench boots or something. A woman can feel she's taking some part in the actual campaign then. Don't you think so, Mrs. Crewe? But there aren't many other things she can do," concluded the girl with that soft up-and-down accent, "unless she's actually a Red Cross nurse looking after the wounded. There's nothing else." "Oh, isn't there, surely?" began the aeroplane lady. Then she stopped, with a half-humorous, half-sad little smile in her eyes. She was going to have suggested that the biggest job that a woman can achieve has, at the root of things, everything to do with the carrying on of a campaign. Those English workmen in the shops were responsible for the perfect and reliable workmanship of the ships and guns. It was only the women of England who could make themselves responsible for the soundness and reliability of the men of the next generation, their little sons now growing up, to be perhaps the soldiers of the next war. All this flashed through the mind of the aeroplane lady, who was also the mother of a fighting airman. But on second thoughts, she decided that she would not say anything about it, not to this cherub-headed, guileless girl who bore Paul Dampier's name and who wore his glitteringly new wedding ring on her finger, that is, when she hadn't forgotten it, where it lay in the soap dish in the bathroom or hanging up on a peg in the wing room beside her sunshine, yellow jersey coat. It was, as the newly married Mrs. Dampier explained, miles too big for her, and she hated getting it a mass of dope. So, instead of saying what she was going to say, the aeroplane lady drank tea out of a workman, like looking saucerless Brittany cup with two handles, and presently asked if there were anything exciting that she might be allowed to hear out of the letter that had arrived that morning from Mr. Dampier. Those eagerly looked-for, greedily devoured letters from the young airman to his wife were uncertain qualities enough. Sometimes they came regularly, frequently, even 2 in a day, for Gwenna to kiss and to learn by heart and to slip under her pillow at night. Then for days and weeks there would be nothing from him, and Gwenna would seem to herself to be going about with her flesh holding its breath in suspense all over her body. That suspense was not, curiously enough, too agonized for his safety. She had laughed quite easily the day that one of the older workmen had said to her kindly, if tactlessly, "Ah, Miss Williams, or ma'am, as I suppose I ought to say, I do feel sorry for you, I do. You here, same as when you was a single young lady. Your young gentleman God knows where, and you knowing that as likely as not you never will see him again, perhaps." "If I were not going to see him again," the girl had said tranquilly, "I should know, I should feel it, and I haven't that feeling at all, Mr. Harris. I'm one of those people who believe in presentiments. And I know I shall see him, though I don't know when." That was the only trouble. When? When? When would she have something for her love to live on, besides just messages on lifeless paper? Paul's letters were sometimes mere hasty scrawls. An all's well, a darling or so, and his name on a bit of thin-ruled paper torn from a notebook and scented vaguely with tobacco. Today it was a longer one. "It's dated 4 days ago only, and it's just headed France. said young Mrs. Dampier, sitting, backed by the cottage window, with the level Berkshire landscape, flowering now into lines of white tents for the new army in training, behind her curly head. He says, "Last week, I had a day, if you like, engaged with 2 taubes in the morning. Machine hit in 4 places. In the afternoon, as I was up reconnoitring, I saw below me a railway train, immensely long, going along as slow as a slug, with 2 engines. Sent in my report to headquarters and wasn't believed, if you please. They said there couldn't be a train there. Line was destroyed. However, they did condescend to go and look. Afterwards, I was told my report was of the greatest value." "There! Think of that," broke off Gwenna, with shining eyes. "And it's leaked out now that what I saw was a train crammed with ammunition. Afterwards, same day, went and dropped bombs on some works at, I'd better not say where. And hope I get to know what damage was done. I know one was a clinking shot. A great game, isn't it?" "Isn't it?" murmured the girl who had shuddered so at her first realization of her lover as a possible fighter. But now, after these weeks, she shrank no longer. Gradually she had come to look upon war as a stupendous adventure from which it would have been cruelty to shut him out. She saw it now as the reward of his years of working, waiting, experimenting. And she said to herself fancifully, "It must be because I've drunk of his cup, and now I've come to think his thoughts. I don't care what those suffragettes say about losing one's individuality. I do think it's a great game," she read on. "Got 3 letters and punch from you in the evening. Thanks awfully. You will write to me all you can, darling, won't you? The little wing is quite safe in my tunic pocket. Give my love to Mrs. Crewe and to your uncle and to Leslie Long. Heard from old Hugo that he was actually going to enlist. Do him lots of good." "Then he sort of ends up," said Gwenna, dimpling to herself a little over the ending. "You're always BOY. And then there's a postscript. Wouldn't it be top hole if I could get some leave to come over and fetch the PDQ? Guess the censor will be puzzled to know who she is. Who's your lady friend? In fact, PD." "Thank you, Mrs. Dampier," said the aeroplane lady, as she rose briskly to return with her assistant to the works. "Give him my love, too, if I may, when you write. And I should like to tell you to write and ask Leslie Long down to see us one Saturday afternoon," she added, as they came through the gap in the dusty hedge to the entrance road. "But really we're too rushed to think of such relaxations as visitors," for since Gwenna had come back to the works neither she nor her employer had taken any sort of holiday. That sacred right of the English worker, the Saturday half-day off, existed no more at those busy aircraft works. Just as if it were any ordinary day of the week, the whistle sounded after the midday rest. And just as if it were any other day of the week, Mrs. Crewe's men, all picked workers, of whom not one happened to be a trades unionist, stacked up the bicycles on which they'd ridden back from their meal at home in the nearby town and trooped into the shops. They continued to hurry up with those ships and guns. Again, the whirring and the chinking and the other forge, like noises, would fill the place. Again, the quick, achieving movements of clever hands, black and soaked in oil, would be carried on, sometimes until, from the training camps on the surrounding ugly, useful plains, the bugles had sounded, "Lights out." Chapter 10. Leslie, ONTHE Motley, OFMARSS. Now, as it happened, Miss Leslie Long did not choose to wait for her invitation to the aircraft works. Unasked and unexpected, she turned up there the very next Saturday afternoon. She was given a chair in that spacious, white, characteristically scented room where Mrs. Crewe and Gwenna were again busy with the wings. She was told not to expect either of them to stop work to look at her, but to go on talking and to tell them if there were anything new going on in London. Anything? Why, everything's new, Leslie told them gaily. She wore the mauve linen frock and the shady hat that had been her bridesmaid's attire for Gwenna's wedding. And she was looking well, Gwenna noticed, as she stole a glance at her chum, well and happier than she had seen Leslie look since the beginning of this eventful summer. Leslie then gossiped to them of the many changes in London. These are now very ancient history to a whole nation. But at that time, in September 1914, they sounded still strange enough to those who lived out of town. She spoke of the darkened streets, the bright, purposely misleading lights in the park, of the recruiting posters, the recruiting results, of the first of the refugees. Leslie's old lady had given hospitality to 2 ladies, a mother and a daughter from Brussels, and it was Leslie's new duty to translate English to them. Also of the departure of regiments she talked. Of course, there are only 2 classes into which you can divide the young men who aren't getting ready to go out, decreed Leslie, the wholehearted. Either they're objects of pity, or else they're objects of contempt. Come, come, put in the aeroplane lady, laughing a little, but without raising her eyes from the stretched canvas on the trestles before her. What about my men outside there? I bet they envy the rawest recruit in Kay's army, declared Leslie. The most anemic little plucky shop assistant, who's only just scraped through on his chest measurement, and who's never spent so many consecutive hours in the open air in his whole life before. She patted the stately head of the Great Dane as he stepped up to her from his big wooden kennel in the corner, and went on to say how she loved the new armies. We see plenty of their doings up at Hampstead now, Taffy, she said. The Heath has armies plenty, and semi-warlike bands. Queen's Westminster's coming up in sweaters and shorts to do physical echoes on the cricket pitch. Swagger young men, some of them too, driving up in cars, wearing their Jermyn Street winter sports kit of last year under common privates' overcoats. Mars in motley, said the aeroplane lady. Leslie said, It is a mixture. New Army Type No. 1, Section A, the boy who was born to be a soldier and bred to be a clerk. The fighter who wouldn't have got a chance to live if it hadn't been for this war. The dear duck who's being taken to the water for the first time after 20 years. Then, of course, there's the new Army Type No. 43, the honest striver in khaki, putting his back into learning a job that wasn't ever meant to be his. Not one bit thrilled by the idea of a scrap. No fun to him. Civilian down to his bones. But it is his duty, and he does. All the more credit, the aeroplane lady reminded her quietly. To the born civilian. Yes, I know, Mrs. Crewe. And one thoroughly respects him for it, agreed the soldier's daughter warmly, adding meditatively, but it's rather an effort to like him as much as the other kind. Talking of duty, Mr. Grant has gone, said Gwenna as she worked. You know, Leslie, the engineer at our Westminster place who was always talking to Mabel Butcher and then saying, Well, duty calls, I must away. I'm sure he said that before he went off to enlist. He's in the Ryan, the office boy that had such an awful accent went with him. He's in the halberdiers now, billeted in the country in some garage with 6 other men. How funny. Do you know who one of the men is? My friend, Monty Scott, the Dean's son, said Leslie, laughing again. You remember him, Taffy, at that dance? He wore that Black Panther get-up. He came up to see me in uniform last Sunday. I told him he'd only joined the halberdiers because he thought the touch of black suited him. Then he told me of his weird billet in the country with these 5 other men. 2 of them had lately come out of prison, he said, and they were really awfully interesting, comparing the grub they'd had there with what was served out to them here. I asked him, Monty, how he was getting on. He summed up the lot of the new ranker rather well, I thought. He said, I've never been so uncomfortable or laughed so much in my life. The aeroplane lady, working, said she thought he must be a dear. He is rather, agreed the girl who had thrice refused to marry this young man. Why do you sigh? Asked Gwenna quickly. A sigh meant, to her, only one thing. Impatience over the absence of the beloved. Perhaps I was thinking of Monty Scott's eyes, said Leslie lightly, bending over to smooth the dog's neck. They are so absurdly handsome. Such a pity one can't have them to wear as brooches. Then, quickly, she turned from the subject of Monty Scott. She drew something out of her black silk bag, a picture postcard. From one of our allies, said Leslie, showing it. It gave a view of a French regiment, still wearing the picturesque uniform of 1870, marching down a sunny, chestnut-bordered boulevard. The soldier in the immediate foreground showed under the jaunty kepi a dark, intelligent, mobile face that Gwenna recognized. She sighed and smiled over the card. It brought back to her that tea at Hugo Swain's rooms with Leslie, and the tall, blonde Englishman who was to be her husband, and that dark young French engineer who had said, "But the machine is also of the sex of Mademoiselle." He had written on this card in sprawling French writing and blue French ink, a Mademoiselle Lang. Salutation amicale. Remember, please, the private soldier Gaston, who carries always in his knapsack the memory of the curate's egg. Fancy, 2 of the men who were at Mr. Swain's that afternoon are off at the front today, said Paul Dampier. That is, all 3, perhaps. Paul said something about his cousin enlisting. Poor Hugo Swain, said Leslie with a laugh that she stopped as if she was sorry she had begun it. It's too bad, really. What is? What is? Isn't he enlisting? Yes. Oh yes, Taffy, he has, but merely enlisting isn't the whole job, said Leslie. To begin with, he could hardly get them to pass him. Why, too fat? Asked Gwenna mercilessly. Fat? Oh no. They said 3 weeks Swedish exercise and drill would take that off. He was quite fit, they said, physically. It was his mental capacity they seemed to doubt, explained Leslie. Of course, that was rather a shock to Hugo to hear, after the years he's been looking up to himself as a rather advanced and enlightened and thinking person. However, he took it very well. He saw what they meant. "Who were they?" asked Mrs. Crewe. "The soldier men he went to, first of all, old brother officers of his father's, who'd been with his father in Egypt, and whom he asked to find him a job of some sort. They told him, quite gently of course, that they were afraid he was not up to any soldiering job. They said they were afraid there were heaps of young Englishmen like him, awfully anxious to do their bits, but simply not clever enough. Rather nice, isn't it, the revenge, at last, of the brainless army type on the cultured civilian. And he said to the old colonel, or general, or whatever it was, 'I know, sir. I see, sir. Yes, I suppose I have addled myself up by too much reading and too much talk. I know I'm a stage society and café royal rotter, and no earthly good at this crisis.' And then he turned round and said quite angrily, 'Why wasn't I brought up to be some use when the time came?' And the old soldier man said quite quietly, 'My dear Swain, none of you enlightened. People believed us that there was any time coming. You see now that we were right.' And Hugo said, 'You ought to have hammered it into me. Isn't there anything that I can do, sir?' And at last they got him something." "What?" demanded Gwenna. "Well, of course, it sounds rather ludicrous when you come to say what it is," admitted Leslie, her mouth curling into a smile that she could not suppress. "But it just shows the Philistines that there is some use, if not beauty, in futurist painting, after all. One always knew there must be something, if one could but find it out." "But your friend Mr. Swain can't do futurist paintings," objected the aeroplane lady, "at the front." "Well, but that's just what he is doing. He's in France, at Quizette, painting motorbuses to be used for transport wagons," explained Leslie. "You know, the most disguising colour for those things at a distance is said to be not khaki, or feld grau, or dull green, or any other single colour. You have to have a sort of heather mixture of all the most brilliant colours that can be got. This simply makes the thing invisible a certain way off. It's the idea of the game, feather tweed on the moors, you know. So Hugo's using his talents by painting emerald green and magenta and scarlet and black triangles and cubes and splodges all over those big vanguards." "Why, I could do that," murmured the girl who was so busy varnishing the aeroplane wings. "Sure I could." "Oh, but Taffy, you haven't been educated up to it," protested Leslie gravely. "You couldn't get it sufficiently dynamic and simultaneous and marionettic." A message from the central shop to the aeroplane lady left the two girls alone presently in the wing room. Then Leslie, putting her hand on the rounded arm below the loose sleeve of Gwenna's working pinafore, said softly and quickly, "Look here, I came down because I had something to tell you, Taffy." The Welsh girl glanced quickly up into her chum's black eyes. "Something to tell me?" Gwenna's heart sank. She didn't want to hear of Leslie having definitely made up her mind at last to marry a man who was good-natured and well-bred and generous enough about wedding presents, but who confessed himself to be of no earthly good when it came to the real things of life. "Oh, Leslie, it is that you can congratulate me. Oh, dear." "I was afraid you mean you were engaged to him, Leslie, to Mr. Swain." "No," said Leslie, holding her black head high. "No, not to Mr. Swain. Why must congratulations always mean Mr. Anybody? They don't here. I mean, you can congratulate me on coming to see reason. I know now that I mustn't think of marrying him." And Gwenna drew a big breath of relief. She laid her dope-thickened brush carefully down in the tin and clapped her little sticky hands. "I'm so thankful," she cried childishly. "It wouldn't have done, Leslie." "No," said Miss Long. "He wasn't a quarter good enough." "Pooh! What's that got to do with caring?" "Nothing," declared Leslie, tilting her loose-limbed, mauve-clad figure back on the chair that Paul Dampier had sat in the day before the aviation dinner. "It's caring that counts." "Haven't I always been saying so?" said Gwenna earnestly as she took up her brush again. "Not just because I'm a happily married woman myself, my dear." Here she drew herself up with the same little gesture of matronly dignity that had made Mrs. Crewe smile. It forced Leslie to bite her lips into gravity. And Paul Dampier's girl concluded innocently, "I've always known how much love means. What's money? Nothing to run down, I assure you." "Money's gorgeous. Money means power," affirmed Leslie. "Apart from the silk-stockinged aspect of it, it lets you live a much fuller life mentally and spiritually. It can make you almost everything you want to be, to yourself and to other people, Taff. It's worth almost anything to get it." But there's one thing it's not worth, said Leslie Long, really gravely. It's not worth marrying the wrong person for. Why? I don't know why you didn't know that before, said little Gwenna, feeling for once in her life so much older and much wiser than her chum. What makes you know it now, Leslie? The war, perhaps. Everything's put down to the war nowadays, but it has simplified things. One knows better what's what one must keep, what one can throw overboard, said Leslie Long. Everything has changed. Gwenna thought for a moment of telling her that one thing did not change: love. Then she thought that that was not quite true either. In its own way, love, too, was changed by this war. There's more of it, thought Gwenna simply. For had not her own love to her absent lover burned with more steady a flame within her, ever since the morning when she had seen him depart to take his own share in the struggle? And so she guessed it must be with many a girl, less ardently in love than she had been, but now doubly proud of her man and her soldier. She thought of the other hurried war, bridals and betrothals all over the country. She thought of the gentler voice and manner that she had noticed between the husbands and wives among the cottages down here. They realized, perhaps, how many couples were being swept apart by war. Yes, this thought seemed to give man and woman an added value in the eyes of each other, Gwenna thought. She thought of the gradual disappearance of the suffragette type with her indictments against man. She thought of the new courtesy with which every woman and girl seemed to be treated in the streets and tubes and omnibuses by every man who wore the livery of war. Of the two things greater than all things in this world, one fulfilled the other. And, because war was in the world again, it was bringing home undeniably to man and maid alike that the first is love. Then Gwenna sighed from her heart. How long, how much longer would it be before she could see her own lover again? Chapter 11. A love letter, and then a rose. A couple of days after Leslie's visit, Gwenna was moving about the bedroom at Mrs. Crewe's cottage. It was an old-fashioned, quaintly pretty room. The low ceiling, on which the lamplight gleamed, was crossed by two sturdy black oak beams. Straw matting covered the uneven floor, and the wallpaper was sprinkled with a pattern of little prim posies in baskets. The chintz of the casement, curtains showed flowering sprays on which parrots perched. There was a patchwork quilt on the oaken bed. Gwenna had come up early, it was only 9 o'clock. So, having undressed and got into her soft white ruffled nightgown and her kimono of pink cotton crepe, she proceeded to indulge in one of those bedroom potterings so dear to girlhood's heart. First there was a drawer to be tidied in the dressing table that stood in the casement window, ribbons to be smoothed out and rolled up, white embroidered collars to be put in a separate heap. Next there was the frilling to be ripped out of the neck and sleeves of her grey linen dress that she had just taken off, and to be rolled up in a little ball and tossed into the wastepaper basket. Then 2 Cash's marking tapes with her name, Paul Dampier, to be sewn on to the couple of fine Irish linen handkerchiefs that had been brought down to her as a little offering from Leslie. Then there was her calendar to be brought up to date, 3 leaves to tear off until she came to the day's quotation. Don't call the score at half-time. Then there was the last button to sew on to a filmy camisole that she had found leisure, even with her work and her knitting, to make for herself. Gradually, young Mrs. Dampier meant to accumulate quite a lot of pretties for the bottom drawers, that ideal which woman never utterly relinquishes. The house and furniture of married life Gwenna could let go without a sigh. The nest. Pooh! But the ideal of the plumage was another matter. Even if the trousseau did have to come after the wedding, never mind. A trousseau she would have by the time Paul came home again. Having finished her stitching, she put her little wickerwork basket aside on the chest of drawers and took out the handkerchief sachet in which she kept all his letters. She read each one over again. I'll finish mine to him tonight, she decided. It'll go off before 8 in the morning, then save a post. From under her work basket she took her blotting pad. And the letter to Paul was between the leaves, with her fountain pen that she'd used at school. She sat down in the wicker-seated chair before the dressing-table and leaned her pad up against the edge of that table, with her brushes and comb, her wicker-cased bottle of eau de cologne, her pot of skin cream and her oval hand mirror, its silver back embossed by Reynolds' immortal group of cherubs whose curly heads and soft tip-tilted faces were not unlike Gwenna's own as she sat there, reading over what she had already put in that letter to the front. It began in what Gwenna considered an admirably sedate and old-fashioned style. My dearest husband, she thought. The censor, whoever he is. That Paul talks about, when he reads that he'll think it's from somebody quite old, and been married for 10 years perhaps, instead of only just, 7 weeks. It went on to acknowledge the last note from Paul and to ask him if she should send him some more cigarettes, and to beg that he would, if he could possibly manage it, get one of his friends to take a snapshot of him. Paul, in uniform, as Gwenna had never yet seen him. Beside the swung oval mirror on the dressing table, there was set up in a silver frame the only portrait that she possessed of her boy husband, the glazed picture postcard that Gwenna had bought that Saturday in May when she had gone to see the flying at Hendon with her 2 friends from the Westminster office, Mabel Butcher and Ottilie Becker. Gwenna's eyes fell on that photograph as she raised them from her pad. Her thoughts, going back to that afternoon, suggested the next item to be written to Paul. And the young girl wrote on, in much the same style as she would have talked, with few full stops and so much underlining that some words seemed to have a bar of music below them. You remember my telling you about Miss Becker, the German girl that I used to be at Westminster with, when we used to call ourselves the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker? Well, what do you think? She has been taken away from her boarding house where she was in Bloomsbury, and interned in some camp as an alien enemy, although she is a girl, and they say she nearly was just on trial as a spy. Mabel Butcher wrote and told me about it. She, Miss Butcher, went with Ottilie Baker when she had to register herself as an alien at Somerset House just after the war broke out, and she said it was awful. A great place like 6 national galleries rolled into one, and miles of immense long corridors, and simply crowds of all kinds of Germans and Austrians, just like a queue at the theatre, waiting to be registered. And all looking scared to death, quite a lot of pretty girls among them too. Poor Ottilie Becker cried like anything at having to go, and to be an enemy alien, you know she'd got such heaps of friends in England, and liked lots of English ways. She used to have a bath every morning even. I hate to think of her being a prisoner. Of course I know one ought to feel that all Germans ought to be wiped out now, wrote Gwenna, but it makes you feel sort of different when it's a girl you've known and had lots of little jokes with, and I was with her the very first time I heard of you, so I shan't be able to help always feeling a little kinder about her. The reason she was arrested was because they found in her room at the boarding house a lot of notes about the engineering works, our works, which she had been going to send off to that soldier, brother of hers, Karl. She declared she didn't know she wasn't supposed to, and that she hadn't an idea of our going to war with her country or anything, and I'm sure she didn't mean any harm at all. She said she'd seen her brother Karl in England the week before war was declared, and that he hadn't said a word to her then. And so perhaps he was that waiter all the time. You know, the one we saw in the cab that last Sunday of peacetime. I expect he is fighting us now, isn't it extraordinary? This was the end of the sheet. Gwenna took another. Her letters to the front were always at least 6 times as long as the answers that she received to them, but this was only to be expected. And Paul had said he loved long letters, and that she was to tell him absolutely everything she could. All about herself, she went on. You tell me to take care of myself and not to work too hard. Well, I am not. And I am quite well. And Mrs. Crewe is most awfully kind to me, and the little maid here spoils me. Every night when I am in bed, she insists on bringing me up a glass of hot milk and 2 biscuits, though what for I don't know. Is there anything more about your coming back from the front to fetch the PDQ? Oh, it would be so lovely to see you even for a few days. I sometimes feel as if I had never seen you. She sighed deeply in the quiet, lamp-lit room, where the chintz casement curtains stirred faintly above the open window. It had been so long, all this time of being without him. Why? She had scarcely had a week of knowing him hers, before there had come that rushed war bridal and the goodbye. And all she had to live on were her memories, and a glazed picture postcard, and a packet of pencil-scrawled letters of which the folds were worn into slits. She couldn't even write to him as she would have wished. Always there brooded over her that spectre, the censor, who possibly read every letter that was addressed to a man at the front. Gwenna knew that some people at home wrote anything they wished, heedless that a stranger's eye might see it. Leslie, for instance, wrote to one of her medical students, now working with the RAMC in Paris, as "My dear Harry," and the censor, adding an occasional parenthesis, "You won't understand this expression, Mr. Censor, as it is merely a quite silly family joke." She, Gwenna, felt utterly unable to write down more than a tithe of the tender things that she would have liked to say. Tonight she had a longing to pour out her heart to him. Oh, and she would say something, even if she tore up that sheet and wrote another. She scribbled down hastily, "Darling boy, Do you know I miss you more every day? Nobody has ever missed anybody so dreadfully. Here she was wrong, though she did not know it. It was true that she longed hungrily for the sight of that dear blonde face, with its blue, intrepid eyes, for the sound of that deep and gentle voice, and for the touch of those hands, those strongly modelled lips. But all these things had been a new joy, scarcely realized before it was gone. She would have told you that it made it worse for her. Actually, it meant that she was spared much. Her lover's presence had been a gift given and snatched away, not the comradeship of years that, missing, would seem even as the loss of a limb to her. The ties of daily habit and custom which strengthened that many-stranded cord of love had not yet been woven between these two lovers. I sometimes think it was really awfully selfish of me to marry you, Gwenna wrote, thinking to herself, oh, bother that old censor just for once. She went on more hurriedly. You might have married somebody like that Miss Muriel Conyers, with those frightfully lovely clothes and all her people able to help you on in the army, or somebody very beautiful and rich. Anybody would have been glad to have you. And I know I am just a little nobody, and not a bit clever, and even Leslie used to say I had a Welshy accent sometimes when I speak, and I dare say lots of people will think, oh, how could he? Why, she isn't even very pretty. She raised her eyes, deeper and brighter in the lamplight, and gave a questioning glance at her reflection in the oval, swung mirror on the dressing table at which she wrote. It would have been a captious critic indeed that could have called her anything less than very pretty at that moment, with her little face flushed and intent, a mixture of child and woman in the expression of her eyes and about her soft parted lips. Above the ruffle of her nightgown, her throat rose proudly, thick and creamy and smooth. She remembered something he'd told her that afternoon at Kew. He'd said that she always reminded him of any kind of white flower that was sturdy and sweet, a posy of white clover, a white night-blooming stock, some kinds of white roses. She would like to send him a flower in this letter to remind him. She glanced towards the open casement, where the curtain waved. Under the shading foliage of the clematis that grew up to the cottage roof there had climbed the spray of a belated rose. Rose Meany was its name. Mrs. Crewe had said that it would not flower that year. But there was one bud, half hidden by leaves, swelling on its sappy twig, close to Gwenna's window-sill. It'll come out in a day or so, Gwenna thought. I'll send it to him if it comes out white. He was pleased with my looks. So, reassured, she turned to the letter again and added, the only thing is that whatever sort of wife you'd married, they couldn't have loved you like I do, or been so proud of being your wife. Really, sometimes I can hardly believe that I am really and truly married too. She broke off, and again lifted her curly head from bending above the paper. There had been a light tap at the door behind her. Come in, called Gwenna, writing down as she did so. Here is the little maid coming to bring me up my hot milk. Now, darling, darling boy, I do hope they give you enough to eat wherever you are. Behind her, the white door opened and shut. But the maid did not appear at Gwenna's elbow with the tray that held that glass of hot milk and the plate of biscuits. The person who had entered gazed silently across the quiet girlish room at the little lissom figure clad in that soft crumple of pink and white, sitting writing by the dressing table, at the cherub's head, backed by the globe of the lamp that spun a golden aureole into that wreath of curls. There was a pause so long that Gwenna, wondering, raised her head. She gave another glance into the oval mirror that stood on the dressing table just in front of her, and there she saw, not the homely, aproned figure of the little maid that she had expected to see, but the last thing that she had expected. It was a picture like, and unlike, a scene she had beheld long, long ago, framed in the ornate gold-bordered oval mirror in the drawing-room at the Smiths. Over her pink-clad shoulder she saw reflected a broad, khaki-covered chest, a khaki sleeve, a blonde boy's face that moved nearer to her own. Even as she sat there, transfixed by surprise, those blue and intrepid eyes of Icarus looked, laughing joyously, full into hers, and held her gaze as a hand might have held her own. It's only me, said a deep and gentle voice almost shyly. I say, you, she cried, in a voice that rang with amazement, but not with fright, though he, it seemed, was hurrying out hasty warnings to the little thing not to be frightened. He'd thought it better than startling her with a wire. Mrs. Crewe had met him at the door. He'd come straight up, hoped she didn't think he was a ghost. Not for a second had she thought so. Instantly she had known him for her granted and incarnate heart's desire, her flyer, home from the front, her husband to whom she had that moment been writing as she sat there. She sprang to her feet. She whirled round. She could not have told whether she had first flung herself into those strong arms of his, or whether he had snatched her up into them. All that mattered was that they were round her now, lifting and holding her as though they would never let her go again. When reveille sounded from the camp on the plain, the sun was bright on that clematis-grown wall outside the window of Gwenna's bridal room. It gilded the September foliage about the window. Still it also touched a gem of passionate colour set among the leaves of the rose many. That red rose had broken into blossom in the night. Part 3. September 1914. Chapter 1. A WAR-time honeymoon. A morning after Paul Dampier's arrival from the front, he and his wife started off on the honeymoon trip that had been for so many weeks deferred. They motored from the aircraft works to London, where they stopped to do a little shopping, and where Gwenna was in raptures of pride to see the effect produced by the beloved in the uniform that suited him so well. For every passer by in the street must turn to look, with quickened interest now, at an army aviator. Even the young men in their uniforms gave a glance at the soldier, whose tunic buttoned at the side, and whose cap had the tilt that gave to the shape of his blonde head something bird-like, falcon-like. And every girl in the restaurant where they lunched murmured, "Look," to her companion, "that's someone in the Royal Flying Corps," and was all eyes for that kit which, at a time when all khaki was romantic, had a special, super glamour of its own. But the blue eyes of the man who wore it were for no one but the girl with whom he was taking his first meal alone together since they had been man and wife. Her own glance was still hazy with delight. Oh, to see him there facing her, over the little round table set in a corner. They ate cold beef and crusty loaf and cheese in memory of their first lunch together in that field, long ago. They drank cider, touching glasses and wishing each other all luck and a happy life. "And fine weather for the whole of our week's honeymoon," added the bridegroom as he set down his glass. "Lord, I know how it can pour in your Wales." For it was to Wales that they went on by the afternoon train from Euston, to Gwenna's home, arriving late that evening. The Reverend Hugh Lloyd was away on a round of preaching visits about Dolgelly. They had his black hen-like housekeeper to chirp and bustle about them with much adoring service, and they would have the chapel house to themselves. "But we won't be in the house much," Gwenna decided, "unless it pours." It did not pour the next morning. It was cloudless and windless and warm, and looking round on the familiar landscape that she had known when she was a little child, it seemed now to Gwenna as if war could not be. As if it were all a dream and a delusion. There was no khaki to be met in that little hillside village of purple slate and grey stone. Only one or two well-known figures were missing from it. A keeper from one of the big houses on the other side of the river and an English chauffeur had joined the colours, but that 9 days' wonder was over now. Peace had made her retreat in these mountain fastnesses that had once echoed to the war, shouts and the harp music of a race so martial. It was the music that had survived. Paul Dampier had put on again that well-known and well-worn grey tweed jacket of his, so that he also no longer recalled war. He had come right away from all that, as she had known he would, come safely back to her. Here he was with her, and with a miracle between them, in this valley of crystal brooks and golden bracken and purple slopes. It was meant that they, too, should be together thus. Nothing could have stopped it. She felt herself exulting and triumphing over all the fates who might have tried to stop it, and over all the forces that might have tried to keep him from her. His work on the machine? Pooh! That had actually helped to bring them together. The Great War? Here he was, home from the war. "I've always wanted to be with you in the real country, and I never have," she told him, as together they ran down the slate steps of Uncle Hugh's porch after breakfast and turned up a path between the sunny larch-grown steeps. That path would be a torrent in the winter-time. Now the slate pebbles of it were hot under the sun. "I don't really count that country, that field, that day. Didn't seem to mind it when we were there," he teased her as he walked beside her, swinging the luncheon basket that Margaret had put up for them. "I mean, of course, when I was there." Gwenna affected to gasp over the conceit of men. "If I've got to be with one," she told him as if wearily, "I'd rather it was in a nice place for me to listen to his nonsense." "Wasn't any nonsense, as you call it, in that field?" "No," agreed Gwenna, "there wasn't." He looked sideways and down at her as she climbed that hill path, hatless, sure-footed and supple. Then a narrow turn in the path made her walk a little ahead of him. She was wearing a very simple little sheath of a grey cotton or muslin or something frock, with a white turned-down collar that he hadn't seen her in before, he thought. suited her awfully well. Being a man, he could not be expected to recognise it for the grey linen that she'd had on when he'd come upon her that afternoon, high up on the scaffolding at Westminster. Yes, though, there was nonsense, he said, now suddenly answering her last speech. Fact of the matter is, it was dashed nonsense to waste such a lot of time. Time? How? Asked Gwenna guilelessly without turning her head. Oh, as if you didn't know, he retorted, wasting time talking about the machine to you, catching hold of your hand to show you what the camber was, and then letting it go, instead of owning up at once, yes, all right, you've got me, Pax. And starting to do this, he was close up behind her now on the mountain path, and because of the steep ground on which they stood, her head was on a higher level than his own. He drew it downwards and backwards, that brown, sun-warmed head to his tweed-clad shoulder. You'll break my neck. I know you will, one day. You were so rough, complained Gwenna, twisting round, however, and taking a step down to him. I love you to be, she whispered. She kissed his coat lapel. All the red of that rose bloomed now on her mouth. They walked on, with his arm a close, close girdle about her. The luncheon basket was forgotten on the turfy slope on which he'd dropped it, so they lunched, late, in the farmhouse 400 feet above the quarry village. It was a lonely place enough, a hillside outpost, fenced by stunted damson trees. A short slate-flagged end of path led to the open door where a great red baking crock stood, full of water. Inside, the kitchen was a dark, cool cave, with ancient, smooth-worn oaken furniture that squeaked on the slate-slabbed floor, with a dresser rich with willow pattern and lustre, and an open fireplace, through which, looking up, they could see through the wood smoke a glimpse of the blue sky. And in this sort of place people still lived and worked as if it were 1700 and something, and scarcely a day's journey away was the aircraft factory where people lived for the work that will remake the modern world. Oh, most romantic of all ages that can set such sharp contrasts side by side. An old Welsh woman, left there by her sheep-farming sons at home in the chimney corner, set buttermilk before the lovers and ambrosial home-churned butter, and a farmhouse loaf that tasted of nuts and peat smoke. They ate with astonishing appetites, Gwenna sitting in the window seat under the sill crowded with flower pots and a family Bible. Paul, manlike, stood as near as he could to the comfort of the fire even on that warm day. The old woman, who wore clumping clogs on her feet and a black much-cap on her head, beamed upon the pair with smiles as toothless and as irresistible as those of an infant. You must have a plenty, whatever, she urged them, bringing out another loaf of bara breath or currant bread. Come on, sir. Come, Miss Williams, now. Ma'am, I mean. Yes, yes. You married lady now. Your husband, with a skinny hand on his grey sleeve, your husband is not a minister. He's a soldier, Mrs. Jones, explained Gwenna, proudly, and with a strengthening of her own accent, such as occurs in any of her race when revisiting their wilds. He's an airman. Ah, queried Mrs. Jones, beaming. He goes flying. You know, on a machine, up in the sky. Well, oh, ejaculated the old woman, and laughed shrilly. To her, this was some eccentric form of English joke. Flying? Like the birds, dear, dear. What else does he do, carriad fach? She asked of Gwenna. He's been over in France, fighting the Germans, said the girl, while the old woman on her settle by the fire nodded her muched head with the intense, delighted expression of some small child listening to a fairy story. It was indeed no more, to her. She said, well, indeed. He took a very kind one, too. Then she added, I not much English. Pity, pity, and said something in Welsh, at which Gwenna coloured richly and laughed a little and shook her head. What's she say? Demanded Paul, munching, but his girl-wife said it was nothing, and turned her tip-tilted profile, dark against the diamond window panes, to admire one of the geranium plants in the pots. Afterwards, when the couple were outside again in the fresh sunlight on the mountain-lands, young Dampier persisted with his questioning about what that old woman had said. He betted that he could guess what it was all about. And he guessed. Gwenna admitted that he had guessed right. She said, she told him shyly, that it ought to be a very pretty one, whatever. I've got a very pretty present for it, Paul whispered presently. What? Don't you remember a locket I once took? A little mother-of-pearl heart, he said. That's what I shall keep it for. And there fell a little silence between them as they walked on, swinging hands above the turf, gravely contented. They had had to spend the day together thus. It seemed to Gwenna that all her life before had been just a waiting for this day. Below the upland on which they swung along, grey figures on the green, there lay other wide hill spaces, spread as with turf-green carpets, on which the squares of mellowing, golden-brown autumn woods seemed rugs and skins cast down. Below these again stretched the further valley with the marsh, with the silver loops and windings of the river, and the little white moving caterpillar of smoke from the distant train. There was also a blue haze above the slate roofs of a town. But here, in this sun-washed loneliness far above, here was their world, hers and his. They walked, sometimes climbing a crest where stag's horn moss branched and spread through the springy turf beneath their feet, sometimes dipping into a hollow for 2 miles and more. They could have walked there for half a day and seen no face except that of a tiny mountain sheep, cropping among the gorse, heard no voice but those of the calling plovers, beating their wings in the free air. Then, passing a gap in 2 hills, they came quite suddenly upon the cottage and the lake. The sheet of water, silent, deserted, reflected the warm blue of the afternoon sky and the deep green of the overhanging boughs of great hassock-shaped bushes that covered 2 islands set upon its breast. Rhododendron bushes. When they're in blossom, they're all simply covered with flowers, pink and rose colour, and reflected in the water. "It is so lovely," Gwenna told the lover beside her. "Oh, Paul, you must come here again and see that with me in the spring." On the further bank was another jungle of rhododendron and laristinus, half hiding the grey stone walls and the latticed windows of the square cottage, a fishing box of a place that had evidently been built for someone who loved solitude. Paul Dampier peered in through one of the cobwebby lattices. Just inside, on the sill, there stood, left there long since, a man's shaving tackle. Blue mildew coated the piece of soap that lay in the dish. Further in, he caught a glimpse of dusty furniture, of rugs thrown down on a wooden floor, of a man's old coat on a peg. A wall was decorated with sets of horns, with a couple of framed photographs with old fishing rods. "Make a jolly decent billet for someone, this," said Paul. Gwenna said, "It belongs to some people. They're away, I think. It's all locked up now. So's the boat for the lake, I expect. They used to keep a boat up here for fishing, the long flat boat they found, moored to one of the stout-trunked rhododendron bushes that dipped its pointed leaves in the peat-brown water fringed with rushes." Paul stepped in, examining her, picking up the oars. "Nice afternoon for a row, ma'am," he said, smiling up at the girl clad in dove grey, on the rushy bank, with the spongy dark green moss about her shoes. "Jump in, Gwenna. I'll row you across the lake. You can't row that old tub, boy." "Can't I? I'll race you round then. Right you are." The girl skipped round the clump of rhodos that hid the last flicker of her skirt, and the boy bent to the short, home-made sculls. The boat was a crank, unhandy little craft, and lacked thole. Pins on one side. Therefore Gwenna, swift-footed little thing that she was, had as good a chance of winning as he. "Like trying to row a bucket," he laughed, as the boat spun. "Hi, Gwen, I ought to have some start, you know." He rowed. Presently he rested on his oars and called, "Hallo, have you started?" Started, came back only the echo from the cottage roof. There was no sign of any grey-frocked running figure on the bank. He scanned it on both sides of him, gave a look towards each of those shrub-covered islands on the smooth expanse. "Gwenna, why, where are you? What's become of the girl?" he muttered. "Gwenna!" She was nowhere to be seen.